Music, radio, podcasts.
Let's get ready to rumble!
5 Live Boxing.
Thanks for joining us again on 5 Live Boxing with Costello Bunce. And shortly after recording our regular weekly podcast today, news emerged, huge breaking news from Eddie Hearn that both sides in the negotiations between Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury had put pen to paper. And so the heavyweight showdown, bigger than any event in British boxing history, moves a step closer. How significant, we're about to discuss. Joshua's promoter Eddie Hearn telling ESPN in the United States that there's been a major effort on behalf of all parties to get the deal over the line, but significantly no date has been set. And Hearn says that regarding the venue, there have been offers from the Middle East, Asia, Eastern Europe and the United States. All of that we've heard before. Negotiations around the venue, around the date, still to be finalised, still hurdles to be overcome, Steve, but the indications are positive.
Negotiations since the middle of December, Mike. It was close, and then the rumours were that one guy wouldn't sign. Then the rumours were that the other guy wouldn't sign. And there even appeared to be last week a suggestion that it wouldn't happen. Tyson Fury said last Friday, it's not happening. I'm back on the booze, he said. And suddenly last week, Alexander Usyk, a Ukrainian, he was going to be fighting Joshua. It was a smokescreen. Well, it appears to have been a smokescreen. What we know at the moment is that it's signed. And you can tell from the enthusiasm in Eddie Hearn's words that this is different. This is different than last June when Tyson Fury said, it's on, I'm fighting Joshua twice in 2021. This is different than all of the false starts. This is real. But let me ask you, Mike, it might be real. It might be real in Eddie's head. It might be real in Tyson's head. It might be real in Joshua's head. I'm going to ask you, is it going to happen? Are we closer? Is it real? Is it genuine?
Steve, I've been saying to you all the way along that the best that we can say while negotiations are ongoing is that the fight hasn't been called off. But I do think that this development is significant because it means that they can now get down to the details about the date and about the venue. And that's why I think there is genuine increased excitement around this particular announcement. I know there's a general feeling elsewhere in boxing that not much has moved on, but I think the fact that they can now leave everything else behind in terms of negotiations, whatever clauses in contracts were proving to be stumbling blocks, we're now down to the date and the venue. Those are still hurdles, as I said, and COVID is still a factor, Steve, because also since we recorded our original podcast today, there's been an announcement that England's remaining T20 cricket matches against India in India will now be behind closed doors because of a surge in cases in the state of Gujarat, where they've previously had crowds of around 60,000 for those T20 matches. And we've heard, Steve, among the few certainties that have been released is that this fight, or fights, if it is a two-fight deal, will not happen behind closed doors. So the venue and what's happening in the venue will be absolutely key. Take, for example, Saudi Arabia. The Middle East, I think, is what most people believe to be the favourite in terms of likely venue. Saudi Arabia last week had single-figure deaths every day of last week with around 300 to 400 new cases. Now, I don't know, will that be deemed to be safe for boxers and a huge crowd to go there? When you go to Saudi Arabia, if it's going to be June and July, I just can't see how that can happen outdoors, given the temperatures, given the climate there at that time of the year. If it was to be a purpose-built outdoor event and an outdoor venue like there was for the Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz rematch in December of 2019, it just wouldn't have been possible for anyone visiting from outside of Saudi Arabia, and even for the locals, to have been able to sit there in the temperatures that they would face in June or July. So there are still hurdles, Steve. That's why, yes, I am getting excited, but I'll start doing my cartwheels when we get a date, when we get a venue.
Well, we're told we might get those by the end of March, and I can assure you and all cricket fans it will not be in Gujarat. Trust me, it will not be there. It will not be at a T20 ground somewhere in India. That's a fact. Take that from me. If it is in Saudi, it could be, Mike, in late May or early June. If, as the plan is, to announce the venue and the date by the end of this month, and we're in the middle of March now, and it could be in the middle of the night. It would just be about bearable in May and early June. It would be really hot. But Mike, here's the thing, and you know this. the actual pound, the money that's taken on the gate is irrelevant. That's a tiny little, in this particular instance, in a tiny little arena. It could be inside with 10,000 people with fantastic air conditioning. It could be outside a bit hot with 8,000 people, because the actual take through the gate is not going to affect the type of money that's needed to make this a reality. Bob Arum obviously wants it at the Allegiance Arena, the Las Vegas Raiders Arena, 75,000. That's not going to happen. They can't commit to that anytime. Plus, it's hot in Vegas in the summer. It's not going to be in the UK because we can't commit to 90,000, which is what we need here. So that means it's going to be in the Middle East. China's been thrown in there. Nigeria's been thrown in there. Eddie likes to do that. It just spices it up, sexes it up a little bit by naming other countries. It's going to be in the Middle East, and if it's indoors, Mike, it doesn't matter if there's only 3,000, 4,000 travelling British fans indoors. It's irrelevant. The money comes from the coffers of a government. The money comes from one of the branches of the government, some kind of sport and cultural branch, whether it's in Dubai, whether it's in Qatar, or whether it's in Saudi. It's that money that matters. So don't get hung up on the size of the arena, or don't get hung up on the size of the arena, Mike, or the heat. Trust me, it won't be outdoors in July in the middle of the afternoon. Of course not. It probably won't be outdoors in mid to late June anywhere in the Middle East. But it could be indoors with, 6,000 or 7,000. That's my gut feeling. It's the money that's put forward by the quote-unquote co-promoters overseas.
Yeah, but I was more concerned also, Steve, in talking about COVID and how that relates to a crowd, not necessarily a crowd of 60,000 turning up like they've been at the cricket matches so far. I'm talking more about visitors to that country, and generally whether two huge parties, two huge camps of the boxers, all of the attendant media, and yes, the fans that would visit from either neighbouring Arab states or wherever. And we're almost assuming that the fight's going to be in the Middle East. But I'm just saying that COVID, Steve, will be a factor if wherever it's meant to be is not coping with outbreaks in the way that other parts of the world, such as Britain and its success with vaccinations, is. That's the point I'm making. And that's why I think there is still this degree of uncertainty and why we're still waiting on a date and on a venue. And I think, Steve, we're running out of time for it to be in May. For a fight of this magnitude,
I agree,
they're going to want a long lead in to build up those pay-per-view figures. If they're not getting the money on the gate from ticket sales, Steve, that they did, for example, in the rematch between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder last year, which generated $17 million, then that money will have to be made up in pay-per-view sales. And then that becomes key as to what time of day the fight takes place at. And I think that's important as well. When Joshua and Ruiz fought their rematch, they made their way to the ring, as memory serves me right, between 11:30 and midnight local time, which was coming up to 9 o'clock in the UK. Absolutely perfect in terms of getting the best and the highest possible audience for pay-per-view. So, the venue and the time of day are absolutely key to building that pay-per-view audience. And also, they're going to want that long lead in to build the likely numbers and to build the excitement around the fight. I go back to maybe the biggest fight I've ever covered in Las Vegas between Oscar de la Hoya and Floyd Mayweather. And Richard Schaefer, who at the time was the head of Golden Boy Promotions, was really, really pushing the pay-per-view. And he said to me, when they announced that fight a long way out, it took place in May, and it had been announced by Christmas time, the previous Christmas. So they had this long, long build-up. And Richard Schaefer said to me that by the time this fight comes around, there won't be a soul breathing in the United States who doesn't know it's happening. They might not buy it, but they'll know it's happening. So they'll need this long lead-in, Steve. And that's why I'm saying that it can't be a kind of a casual wait until we announce when it's happening. If it's going to happen in May, then we're going to have to know that very, very soon to maximize that pay-per-view audience, which is absolutely key to the total revenue.
Mike, the business is so different than when Oscar De La Hoya fought Floyd Mayweather. We're in a different world. We're in a world where you can reach so many more people so much quicker and easier. I think that the traditional pay-per-view, some of the great fights, I know we're going to talk about it a bit later on, some of the great fights in the 80s, they had a 5-month build, 22 city tours. That was the way you had to do things then. These guys might not even have a tour. They might just have one press conference in London or one press conference maybe somewhere in the Middle East and then get straight down to business, as long as they've got the training camp. And the site fee blows out of the water any of the potential gate fees, other than if it was Wembley 90,000 and 20,000 of those tickets were ridiculously priced. The site fee will guarantee that everything that's lost on the gate is made up for, and then the pay-per-view, I don't think we need these 3 and 4 month sales anymore. It doesn't work that way. Plus these two, Mike, they've had a build-up. They've been snapping at each other for 11 years. They've been snapping at each other nastily and truthfully and very physically and visually for about 3 years. The fight was announced last June. So in the traditional world, I'd like to see it announced next week, and I'd like to see us packing our bags for July. I don't think that's going to happen. I think everything's going to be crammed and scrammed together. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying this is 2021. It's COVID. It could be really quick. How about this, Mike? How about we don't get them together before the fight? The first you see of them is the week of the fight. That could happen. As crazy as it sounds, that could happen.
Steve, I was just thinking, reading Eddie Hearn saying the build-up's going to be epic. Can you imagine, though, the first press conference, maybe, as you say, the only press conference? I mean, I can't see it happening without that, but that first press conference, imagine how you feel as you walk into the room waiting for that to happen. I mean, that's an event in itself. I can't see how they won't have at least one, Steve.
Listen, I'd like to think they will have one. Perhaps they'll have one like Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather had that time. When I was in the Mayweather camp, he's a boxer, and you were in the Conor McGregor camp, he's from Dublin. He's a dub. You were firmly in the MMA camp. We had about 9,000 people in Wembley. It was fantastic. And it was to watch two men wander around the ring that was only ringed in on 3 sides. Imagine if these 2 or 3 did this, Mike. They could do the same thing. We could have 50,000 deck chairs spaced 2 meters apart in Hyde Park, and they could be on some giant screen, and people would still sit in those chairs and lap it up. It doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter if they're together. As long as they're together, when the first bell sounds at some point in May, June or July, as long as they're both in the ring, then bingo, brother.
And in terms of people talking about it being a $200 million fight, Steve, you can see where that comes from, can't you? I mean, you're talking about a gargantuan site fee. If the pay-per-view over here was, for example, 40 quid a head, and I think that's the kind of direction we're heading in. If there were 2 million buy-ups, and if it's happening at 9 o'clock in the evening, I think 2 million buy-ups is a conservative estimate. That's 80 million.
So do I.
That's 80 million quid straight away, $100 million straight away and more. The site fee that you talk about, ticket sales, okay, won't make much of a dent, I guess, but merchandise, the international TV rights, the streaming rights. So you can actually quite quickly arrive at that figure.
I don't think you're taking a breath until you get to about $200 million, Mike. I don't even think you need to be too creative to get to that type of total. I really don't. The £40 is going to be heavily discussed. But I think there might be an asterisk attached to that, and that is £40 for this one. The next one, when there's 70,000 outdoors in Las Vegas, or when there's 90,000 at Wembley, we're going to drop it down to 39 quid.
And in terms of the odds, Steve, I mean, we could talk about the fight forever, and I'm sure fans are already debating who they think is going to win, and we'll have plenty of opportunities to do that. But the odds, as we speak, are 7-4 on Fury, 6-4 Anthony Joshua. So Fury's quite significantly odds on at this stage, even though he himself's been making noises recently about inactivity and how concerned he is. But as you said right at the beginning, you know, he's a master of kidology.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. They're tight enough odds. I'm not surprised Fury's slightly in front. I think that's to do with what we saw in Las Vegas on February the 22nd of 2020 when he walked through Deontay Wilder. It wasn't just beating Deontay Wilder, it was destroying and ruining Deontay Wilder. And I think a lot of people from that fight, not casuals, just, it's a horrible expression, casuals, but a lot of boxing fans, diehards and guys that don't, or men and women that don't go to a lot of boxing, just watch the big fights. I think they would have seen that and they would have said to themselves, well, there's no way Joshua stands up to that. And that's what sells this fight, Mr. Costello. There's no way Joshua stands up to that. Boom. That's the punchline. That's the strap. Bingo. See you in Saudi in May.
And happening when both men are at their peak, and you could make an argument that actually they're still improving, like a throwback to the 1980s, which we'll be talking about very shortly, because what a time it is. We've got this breaking news, a huge step towards Fury versus Joshua sometime later this year, hopefully in the next few months. And that's after a weekend in which we saw one of the great fights of recent years and the death of one of the greatest ever to lace on a glove. This was our original podcast recording today.